This is JCU Conversations, a podcast show from James Cook University, Singapore. Tune in as we ask experts in the industry more about their lives and their approach to success. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's listen to today's episode.
Hi, I'm Dr. Pengji Wang, Associate Professor in Business at James Cook University, Singapore. This is JCU Conversations, a podcast show from James Cook University, Singapore, where we ask experts in the industry more about their lives and their approaches to success. Our guest today is Andrew Gazal. Andrew is the founder and CEO of ESGTech, a next-generation verifiable data exchange platform for sustainable finance. Andrew was named one of Singapore's top 10 fintech leaders in 2022 at the Singapore Fintech Festival's Global Fintech Awards. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having us.
So ESG stands for Environment, Social, and Governance, right?
Correct, yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about ESGTech, what ESGTech does, and why these three factors, the ESG, are so important to the industry?
Yeah, definitely. So ESGTech as a company is a technology company. We deliver software and we focus our software related to the space ESG. For us, it's all about operational risk and opportunities within a business. So ESGTech helps businesses manage the data relative to those metrics or indicators, as we call them. What we find is a lot of this is a data issue, and providing data with context is what we're trying to solve. So a big part of that is managing data on behalf of users and also providing context that's specific to ESG.
Perfect. So just now I caught some interesting information, which is, try to get some metrics, some data, and then try to help the company show that they're having a relatively lower risk, right? So that is kind of the ESG performance, right?
Correct,
Okay,
yes.
so can you give us a bit more idea? How does ESGTech help corporations measure these ESG measures, or in using what kind of metrics?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, we look at data and the protocol in which that data is captured. So if I'm going to measure something, I want to make sure I'm using the same protocol so I can compare apples with apples. So ESGTech has what we call our global indicator library. That indicator library is basically a register of all the frameworks and standards that are used internationally. And within those frameworks and standards, you would find a metric. So some common ones are GRI and SASB. Within them, they have industry and sector specific metrics. And with those metrics, you'll have indicators that we call compound up to the metric that would disclose in market. So with our system, companies use it in order to track at an indicator level and then roll up the data to a metric or a disclosure level. When it comes to performance, we don't necessarily tell a company whether they're good or bad. We think that that's subjective, and it's up to the company to measure themselves and then provide their own KPI and targets. What we hope to do is, as companies become more transparent, is allow peers within industries to see who is a high performer, who is a low performer, what is the mean average, and have that feedback loop within market.
Okay, so that sounds quite interesting. So you also mentioned, right? So you're going to use some of the existing protocols to help the companies identify all of those, metrics or the indicators, right? So how can you help with the companies, the verification of those data? Because they are going to tell you this is our data, but are they relevant?
No, we get this a lot from the asset management industry where they say, can you verify our portfolio company's data? And the way we look at it is we provide a digital technology to allow data to be verifiable rather than be the verification. So what I mean by that is if I provide a record, or we call it a fact in the system allows that user to upload chains of evidence. So it could be a documentation like a power bill that will support the energy consumption that was reported for a specific month. What we also do is try and automate as many processes as possible. So let's say I'm a portfolio manager and I have several portfolio companies, and they're all reporting specific to the protocol that I chose through that global indicator library. I may want to aggregate that data. And right now that's done in Excel, and we all know Excel is hugely powerful. But we need to have checks and balances. So in our system, if that portfolio manager created a calculation, which we call a derivation, and they source the data from each of the portfolio companies, the numbers are automatically generated. So that aggregate roll-up is auditable through our system. So if a third party, like an auditor, comes in, they're able to see that this wasn't a manual calculation, this was a system calculation.
Okay, that sounds quite, systematic.
Correct, yeah.
Which is cool. Yeah. And also, so just now you have mentioned one, I would say, indicator, which is the energy consumption. However, we know there are so many different kinds of industries, and of course, in each industry, there are so many different kinds of companies focusing on different business portfolio, right? So are you going to use the same protocol for all of the industries, or these protocols would be, specific to some specific industry, and then you're going to just withdraw the relevant ones?
It's a great question. So referring back to our global indicator library, what we're doing is ingesting all of the known standards or frameworks. And then what we do over time is become somewhat of a trustee of the data, what we call information architecture. So we would look at a region like Singapore, we would pick an industry, say infrastructure, and then we would look at, say, buildings, green buildings, and then we look at the green mark and understand what protocols they are. And we would, as a company, ingest those protocols into our system. So the user can go through a library and select specific metrics that might be region-specific, industry-specific. What we also do is we allow the users to compare different protocols and metrics and then make the decision whether they align to how they want to disclose. Because a big part of this market and this industry at the moment is that users have so many frameworks and standards that they're being asked to comply with. And some of the answers are like for like and some of them are similar. And what we see is that similarity is really subjective again, until, say, for instance, an auditor comes in and says, am I looking at this value to this specific protocol? Have you answered it entirely? And we allow flexibility in that system for the user to make that decision, not for us as a technology provider.
Okay, so users will make the final decision in the end.
Correct, yes. It's their data, it's their disclosure. So.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, I would see your company is pretty important because you're going to provide all of these, the professional knowledge, letting them know about all of those relevant protocols. Okay, because I think not many companies, they have this talent who understands clearly about these protocols, right?
Very much so, yeah. So as a technology company, we partner with global consulting firms and they help businesses go through their materiality assessment. As you know, you have to engage multiple stakeholders.
That's right.
Through that process, then they map what we call their disclosure model, which is aligned with their materiality assessment and the KPIs of that on our system. What we hope to do is start to see some similarities. Does everyone within a cohort, within an industry and region report on some key metrics or some key material topics? And then we can start to suggest that to the user, because ultimately people want to align with market, but at the same time choose and have that opportunity to customize where they think something is specific or important to them.
Yes. Excellent. Okay. So I'm not sure, because whenever we talk about the ESG, many people would also think about another similar term, which is CSR.
Yeah.
Are they the same or different?
In my opinion, and how ESGTech looks at it, they're completely different. The way we look at it is ESG is about material topics that can have a financial impact on a business. So I'll give you an example. You may have a company who sponsors a Little League team. And if they disclose that information or not, will have an impact to an investor's decision. And you and I both know sponsoring a junior Little League team is not going to impact my investment decision. So that's how we split it, is what can commercially have an impact on a business and what is something that is good for society but not necessarily material to a business decision.
Okay, so can I understand it in this way that ESG is more targeted on the investors? Right? Influencing the investor's decision.
I think in investors and stakeholders generally. Correct, yeah. So investors are one stakeholder. Internal stakeholders might be your employees, your supply chain with your partners. They all become factors. I think what we sometimes see, which has been interesting, is that there's a focus on maybe what investors are looking for, what a framework is looking for, rather than the business themselves look at themselves and say, will this have a material impact in my business? Should I be tracking this? And it's a great conversation, which I think will take part between corporates and financial institutions, because ultimately the corporates are the ones bearing all the issue. You have
That's
5
right.
LPs saying, I want data in this way, I want this
That's
protocol.
right. Yeah.
You have a regulator that's going to soon be asking questions, and the burden is growing on the corporate. So that corporate needs to take control and say, look, this is what's material to my business, this is compliant with regulation, and this is how I will disclose the data.
Sure. Okay, great. Yeah, so about something about yourself, because I've noticed that you have really extensive career in engineering, right?
Yes.
Before you really committed into this ESGTech.
Yeah.
So what led you to set up this company, being an engineering before?
Well, as you know, most engineers find a problem and then find a solution for that problem. So I saw a problem in my career, and ESGTech was that solution. So a bit of background, I'm an engineer. I studied naval architecture and subsea engineering, and I spent most of my career in the energy sector. What I noticed was there was more questions being framed as ESG metrics from financial institutions coming on to oil and gas or energy projects. And the questions were quite vague or not necessarily hitting the topic of the material assessment of the project or of the company. And as engineers, we spend our whole time looking at risks and mitigating those risks and managing those risks across a project. So seeing that there is that disconnect between how a financial institution and a corporate communicate, I saw that technology would have to play a part for this to be more efficient in how the comms and the amount of conversation is going to happen. The other part which we started to notice was, and this is as the company has grown, was that this information is now being asked to be audited. And we already know that the auditors are inundated with work with just financial metrics, but then when you start to lay over ESG metrics, computers and software need to play a big part in automating and streaming processes, not necessarily making the decisions on the auditor's behalf, but being able to find inaccuracies or point out things which then an auditor can focus on. So we hope that as regulation comes in, technology will have to grow to simply deal with the demand.
Perfect. Nice. Okay. So, as you have mentioned, right? So the company's job is really to manage the data and then make sure that the data is organized and presented to align with the regulatory, requirements. And having seen all of those data, have you found out some fascinating insights?
Yeah, look, I think some interesting information is coming out of that asset management class where you have a fund manager that has an ESG thematic on the fund. They've selected some, let's say, generic or generalized material topics, and then they're trying to overlay them on the portfolio companies. And not necessarily does the metrics within the ESG thematic of the fund align specifically to the materiality of those portfolio companies. So an example is an asset manager who had an ESG thematic looking at carbon and net zero for E. They looked at diversity and inclusion for S. And then for G, they were looking at basic policy governance within the company. They were doing a due diligence on a med tech that was in hardware and software. And when you look at those carbon emissions, diversity and general policies, it's not really looking at what are the high risks or the materiality concerns within a business like that. So when we looked at it, we saw, well, you should be selecting things like e-waste because you have hardware and software, inclusive pricing because you're in that medical profession or medical supply, so you need to ensure that it's accessible to all. And then patient data security, so being ensure that no one can hack their systems where all their patient data is supplied. So we hope that our system can help fund managers, can help asset managers be more specific to the corporates that they're looking at and then feed that data up to a more generalized metric, which then they can present to their LPs.
Excellent example. I really can see this example illustrates very well about one of the important principles of reporting the ESG, which is the materiality. They also have to choose the relevant data to report, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Yeah. And then regarding, because just now you shared some example regarding the medical sector. So have you found out, is there any difference between the big companies and the small companies regarding their ESG reporting? Which one is more, active?
They're both price conscious. That's something we're seeing across the board is if you're a large publicly listed company, if you're a private SME, the Exco are conscious about how much does software cost within the system. In terms of them rolling out the system and how good they are from a materiality assessment, I think we're seeing pressure from public equities because of the LPs and the driving of market that I want greater transparency. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not relevant to SMEs. Two ways we look at it is that usually a publicly listed disclosure is made up of a supply chain. Their supply chain are usually private SMEs. So that data relationship is connected, and using technology like ESGTech, we can automate that aggregation of supply chain data. But as an SME, and we are an SME ourselves, is you need to measure your business performance. And when we look at sustainability, is the business sustainable? Are there elements which we need to improve? And so on and so forth. So we encourage smaller companies to, if not look at software straight away, but do a materiality assessment, research. There's enough on the internet before you have to go to consultants. But then it also is helpful to have someone to guide and ensure what you're selecting is right. When you've reached that level of progressiveness, then using technology just creates efficiencies like anything else in any other business. Excel can do pretty much everything for everyone's business, but Zoho still is still here.
Sure.
There's all these zeros still here for accounting. So ESGTech is that way of creating efficiencies within ESG data management.
Yeah, sure. I can see some very good insights from what you have shared just now. That the SMEs they also need to commit into this ESG, okay, because they really have to become the suppliers for those big companies, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I see the meaning of introducing this kind of software to help with their efficient reporting. And then, so on an environmental side of things, is there any more way that the companies could become more sustainable? From your...
Yeah, look, and again, this is my own opinion. Environmental, there's a lot of focus on carbon at the moment. We're seeing that everywhere. Measure your carbon emissions, net zero strategies and pledges. But carbon's not necessarily the key material risk in all businesses. We all are exposed to it, don't get me wrong, but there are other elements, water management, biodiversity, which are more important than carbon emissions or carbon reductions within specific businesses. So I think it's making sure that when you read publications and articles, and there was one that